Greetings, everyone. I'm Mike Regan. I'm living in Wellington and introducing Claire Bruell, who is the author of these books. My role was somewhat less than hers. But anyway, she's going to start this proceeding.
Not so. However,
we don't argue.
I'm introducing Mike, who was my collaborator and without whom the book would certainly not have the form that it has today. So
you're on.
Take a seat. So this is not one book, it's 4. So that's what Mike said when I first showed him the material I had amassed. So how did the books come about and the collaboration between us? So our friendship with Mike dates back to our teenage years in Hubbardham. And a couple of years ago, Mike and Jill were staying with us and I showed them the material, family history information I'd been gathering and writing about. And Mike said casually, "If you want some help with the book, I'd be prepared to give you a hand." So, yes, little did he know. So since we were both around the fourscore mark in age, I decided I had better take up the offer sooner rather than later.
So in February last year, I went to Auckland with my computer. We had 2 large screens and sat back to back in Claire's study, using the scanner, the copier, and a shared folder in the cloud. All the while, I contemplated the style, the fonts, the layouts, and calling on past experience and knowledge, while Claire provided a steady stream of text, photographs, maps, graphics, and charts. The final layout in terms of landscape pages that you see in front of you is the format we decided would best fit the range of stories and the quantity of graphics. We had also discussed this with discussions with the printer and looked at his various examples. We were all in agreement. Yes, there were occasional obstacles and frequent practical blockages, plus concerns for style and consistency through the 4 books. The period of time together in Auckland established some loose rules and work habits, which made working apart easier. By the time I returned to Wellington, a basic style and layout for each of the 4 books had been rudely established and was refined over 600 kilometres iCloud and FaceTime. One thing stood out, Claire's desire to leave a legacy for her grandchildren. For me, that meant a text-heavy tome would not do it. The books needed to be accessible, lively, well illustrated, and easily understood. I think the children can see themselves reflected in the books, not just because they're frequently named or referred to, but also through the images and stories. People they will recognise, stories they may have heard over the years, and the style of publication. Once we determined the overall outline, each book fell into place. Book 1 starts with a background history of the region before delving into the great-grandparents. Claire may mention the effects my demands for high-quality photos and graphics wrought on her lifestyle, but the pestering worked. For example, the photo used on the cover of Book 1 were particularly poor quality, and I had them placed further back in the book because they were so bad, until Claire appealed into the ether and provoked a response from Peter's US-based cousins, and a couple of unexpected high-res versions arrived.
So I had been researching for about 35 years. And as I began to assemble family trees, I realised that of our 16 great-grandparents that Peter and I shared, only one of them died in the place where he had been born. And I saw this as a lens through which to look at Jewish history, particularly of the 19th and 20th centuries. So the first part of book 1 is a general history of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, accompanied by maps and old documents. I put this map fairly early on in the book so that readers would see where our families came from. You'll see Moravia and Galicia underlined, Moravia in blue, which is where Peter's father's family and both of my families came from, and Galicia, where his mother's family came from, to Vienna. Where's the ketubah?
Coming.
Okay, so this document on the right is a ketubah, or a marriage contract. It's dated the 17th of June, 1832, and it's between Jacob Briess, Briess being my maiden name, and the bride was Barbara Brooke. And it's an old German, I can't read it, and the original is in the Jewish Museum in Vienna. What's that?
No, it's
That's all right. Okay. I can't read it, but I do perceive that there are some numbers about 1/3 of the way down, and I'm wondering if that's some sort of discussion over property or such like. One day I'll find out. The smaller one on the left shows their signatures and the signatures of their witnesses. So I had a number of old documents like that, which I used in the text. So it was a warm, sunny day in the summer of 2011 when Peter and I set out from Olomouc in Moravia to visit Hranice. In the cemetery there were just 2 headstones still intact. One that was still standing, which you see on the right, was an imposing headstone for Joseph Berger, described as a familiant or head of a household, and he died in 1866. He was my great-great-grandfather, and I was thrilled to find his headstone. Time travel back even further to an earlier century to find Joseph Berger, born 1804, and Anna Singer, his wife, newly married and living in Hranice, also known by the German name as Meerischweiskirchen. So all these towns and villages that I'm mentioning have German names and a Czech as well, and the Czech is mostly in use today. And I apologize in advance for my Czech accent, which is only marginally worse than German. So the earliest Berger we can trace is Joseph's father, Salomon Hirschberger, who lived in Leipzig, and his wife, Frommuth. And the postcard on the left is a view of Leipzig, probably around the turn of the 19th century. There's a horse and cart in the foreground. So Joseph was born there in 1804, as I mentioned, in house number 39, where he later became the familiant or head of household. So Hugo Gold was known because he was a publisher, and he published a big tome on the Jewish communities of Moravia, and he noted that the Berger family was one of the mainstays of the community in 1750. And it was said of Joseph that when he married Anna, he married into a family where he could pursue his Talmudic studies, and that would reflect well on the whole family. So I know quite a bit about the lives of my great-grandparents because an elderly cousin of my mother's had written to her about family history in 1959. He had written, "I'm the last survivor of my generation, and so I need to tell you some family history." And he described the way of life. So Anna Singer was my great-great-grandmother. Her father, Israel Singer, also a familiar, had been born in 1792 in Hranitsa, and he's shown on the oldest register of Jewish families, dated 1805, as living in house number 8 with his parents, Abraham and Jacket Singer. During the first half of the 19th century, this house was the location of the mikveh, or ritual bath. And on the second floor, there were 2 apartments. The Berger family lived in apartment number 1 with their 4 children, Samuel, Sigmund, Fanny, and Rosa, and the Steiner family lived in the second. Judah Steiner looked after the mikveh. The water was brought by a pipe from the public fountain in the square, and they had to be careful not to take too much water because it was also used by the local brewery. In 1860, after Joseph died, Anna moved to nearby Velachich Mezrich, which in Czech is Velasque Mezici, and I'm never going to say that again because colloquial today it's called Val Mes, which suits me fine. So the town was close to Hranitsa where they'd been living, and according to the cousin who'd written to my mother, the Berger family operated a successful business supplying meat to the army and trading in skins and furs. There was a military school in the town, and possibly that's how the family business began, by supplying meat to them. Anna operated the leather business, which she passed to her son Samuel, when he married in 1877. Samuel, my great-grandfather, was active in building up the Jewish community in Valmez, and in 1868, a Chevra Kadisha was formed, and 2 years later, land for a cemetery was acquired. Samuel was on the board of the synagogue, head of the community for some time, and his son, Joseph Pepe Berger, was on the town council and also headed a Zionist society. After acquiring the building at number 6 Namesti, which you'll see shortly, the family business operated from the downstairs while the Jewish school was located on the upstairs floor. A facility for the tanning of leather was situated on the fringes of town, and apparently the smell of naphthalene polluted the countryside for miles around. Samuel died in 1927 and Rosa some years later. And I know much about the family's history thanks to a book written about the Jewish community of the town by an archivist from the archive in Seitin.
And so we move on to Pepe, who was mentioned just previously as his child, and we start the chapter about the Berger and Wolf. So I'm reading from the beginning of this, a short section. On Wednesday, the 15th of March, 1939, a convoy of German military vehicles drove through the town of Valmesh and came to a stop in the square. Some German officers in green uniforms entered the shop at number 6 Namesti and looted the shop of its furs. Successive groups of officers and then soldiers went into the shop and helped themselves to the stock. The following night, Pepe hanged himself in this building, unable to face an uncertain future of German domination and what that might mean. The police report stated that Joseph lived quietly with his wife and was worried about the rise of Nazism. He was a rich, popular, and honourable man and served on the council of the Jewish community. According to the police report, the reason for his suicide was accepted as having been because he was apprehensive about German occupation.
So on the left, you'll see a red arrow pointing to the building which the family owned, and there's a white piece about a third of the way up with his name on, Samuel Berger. And on the map, you'll see an arrow pointing to number 6, the square. Namaste means square. Next. And on the left here, we have a document basically attesting that Joseph Berger, his date of birth, his address, and the date that he hanged himself, and that was the 16th of March. The Germans actually invaded Czechoslovakia on the 15th of March, so this was the next day, and that's recorded in the German files, amazingly enough. And on the right, his wife's transport card. She was deported to the ghetto in Łódź, and she is noted there with an address, and it said she was working as a gardener. Well, who knows? But this shows her name. I don't have my pointer. Her date of birth, her address, the number of her transport, and I think the 974 is the number of people who were on that transport. And this is a photograph of Joseph Pepe's house, which I took when we were there in 2011. And on the right, there is a photograph of a Torah mantle. Now, a Torah mantle is usually in velvet, and it covers the scrolls, which are in the ark of the synagogue. I would never have found this, but I happen to have helped someone else who was researching the Jews of that town, and he had been looking through the holdings of the Jewish Museum in Prague, and he came across this one, and he sent me the image. He said, "Claire, I think this is your family," because what it says is donated by Samuel and Rosa Berger on the, whatever the date was, 1897, on the occasion of the bar mitzvah of their son, Joseph Pepe. And this Torah mantle would have been taken, like all the Judaica from the synagogues of Moravia and Bohemia, would have been taken to Prague to put in a museum, supposedly of dead people. But anyway, it's in the collection of the Jewish Museum. So I thought that was rather special. I did ask if I could see it when we were there, but they said no, it was fragile and stored off-site. This next slide shows the building as it looks today. Very smart. It was, of course, confiscated by the Germans and later by the national government, and it is now owned by the town council, who spruced it up, and there's a couple of very nice shops in the bottom, and they took us into the building, showing us very proudly, not an acknowledgement of the fact that they had taken it, but very proud to show off what it looked like now. And so I stood on that first floor window where Pepe had committed suicide, and I looked across the square and saw all of those Austro-Hungarian era buildings abutting each other, and that's the photo I took with the window. So, yes. On the left, top left, is a postcard of HCNZ, which in the sort of running through the middle, there is a building, and that was the military school where they would have supplied meat. But you can see it's really quite a small place. At the bottom, left, the few graves that have been saved from the cemetery, and fortunately for us, we found my great-grandparents Samuel and Rosa's headstones amongst this lot. They had survived. And on the right is a census form from 1857. Samuel is at the top. I think Rosa's next. I can't actually see that.
Yeah.
Samuel, Rosa, Joseph, Adele,
What happened?
Melanie.
Something's happened here. Oh,
What's happened?
that's all right. Go ahead.
And Martha, who was my grandmother. And I had written ahead to the archive where I thought they might have this record, and I said that we were coming to visit. So Peter and I arrived there at 4:00, one winter's day it was then, and it was almost dark, and the two archivists there, it was just a small suburban facility, and they had been about to shut up shop and go home. But when we arrived, they handed me this, a copy of this census record, which I was delighted to have. And they were lovely. So this is what I tried to do for all of the families which I described. And at the top, you'll see Samuel Hirschberger. And one of the things I liked about this reunion software, which enabled me to produce these trees, is that each generation is a different colour. So Joseph is the second level down. The third level down, you'll see Samuel. And then the next one is Martha, second from the right, down to Alice, my mother, and me, my boys, and the grandchildren along the bottom. So each tree that I did, I tried to show the grandchildren at the bottom so they could follow how they were connected to the families that we were talking about. And how did I do the research? Well, I used the birth, death, marriage, and census records. Of course, easier said than done because they're not in English. But over years, the records become available, and that's, there's a black, can we move that black line?
No, it's not up here. It's only on.
Yeah, I know, but I can't read what's behind it. Okay.
Book 2 covers the lives of the Bruell and Briess parents, their escape from Europe and their arrival in New Zealand. Over the years, Claire, an early and avid user of Apple products and all its bells and whistles, had used their photo book tools to write and print the life of her father. Later, she used those skills to make a more elaborate book about her mother. She still has the original PDFs of both books. We knew that both stories were to be used, and we had a couple of choices. We could extract the text and relay the whole thing out, or we could use the PDFs and place them directly into the book. We chose that way. It meant that we couldn't adjust anything or make any corrections, and we didn't look for them, frankly. The downs, as I said, so these are direct facsimiles from the book of her father, showing him in various guises. They, as you can see, they landed in New Zealand and very early on bought a farm, which was quite a challenge as they'd never had farm before. He later on went into the food business, canning meat and corned beef and the like, and later into spices and herbs, which some of you may remember, a gourmet brand that did reach Wellington at times. And Alice's book, as I say, was a bit more elaborate. It used more photographs, and she put some relevant documents and and artifacts in the background. So here you see Alice's bit of tableware with her initials on it, and on the right is a fan family tree, but in the background she's used her mother's recipe book for context. What number?
Yes, I photocopied the pages from the various recipe books that I had and used them as a background. So that meant that there were actually two photos on that page, one on top of the other, and the fan chart on the top. Now, this document is from the Czech Refugee Trust. This was a trust created on the 21st of July 1939, and it was finally wound up in 1975. And it was the precursor to what is now World Relief. Its original purpose was to assist people fleeing Nazi persecution. So the refugees were not only Czech citizens, but also several hundred Germans and Austrians who had gained asylum in Czechoslovakia. Before the trust was created, several appeals had been launched in Britain for subscriptions for the relief of refugees. Some of this money was set aside for use in London of the British Committee for Refugees from Czechoslovakia. And between October 38 and March 39, the British Committee brought 3,500 refugees from Czechoslovakia to Britain. The assistance to be afforded took two forms: immigration to a further country of settlement, which of course was difficult once the war had started, and the maintenance and training in Britain pending re-immigration. Fred, Lily, Helen Bruell, and Frank and Alice Briess were all helped by the Trust Fund. I knew from Peter's mother that she and Fred had worked for the Trust Fund. I didn't know that my parents were also helped, nor that Peter's grandmother was helped. But shortly before we finished the book, the records of the the records of the fund became available from the British National Archives in Kew. I've never done any research there, but I quickly found out that it was quite complicated. So I had help from a genealogy friend in Boston, and she found them for me. So this is my father, the front page of my father's form, giving his details, where he's living and so on, where he was from. But that little piece in the middle is his account of his experience since leaving Czechoslovakia. So it's his story told at the time. It's not looking back and remembering, it's a contemporary account. Further on, my parents didn't have details about pocket money that they were given. Fred and Lily actually worked for the fund, helping with the administration and sorting out of clothes and things, and their forms were much more detailed, and right down to, how much money they were given as pocket money to come when they came to New Zealand. So that was a bit of a find in more recent times.
Oh, where have we gone?
Lily Bruell.
When they arrived in New Zealand, Fred immediately found work.
Lily.
Both, did they?
Yeah, both.
Yeah, no. The Holocaust Oral History Group of Auckland interviewed Lily Bruell, and that interview is printed in full in this book. Claire had the transcript as a PDF, but turning that into a more usable document proved more difficult than expected. We bought some software which promised satisfaction, and at first it looked fine, but until we noticed an increasing number of variations and mistakes. We tried other ways of massaging the text, but none of it quite cut the mix. Finally, we resorted to human intervention, more hours at the computer face with Claire. It was excruciatingly long-winded, and we spent many hours on it. Maybe it would have been quicker in the beginning to retype it. There are 37 pages of the book with Lily's transcript. The next page, we look at the family. From the left is Ronnie, then Lily, and Fred, Peter, and Helen Bruell. Someone talking? No. Also published were stories of Fred and the company he created, Rex Consolidated, and later Lily's own company, Planet, all based on a humble drawing pin similar to the one illustrated here. No, they've got the wrong one. Never mind. Yeah.
Visualize a drawing.
Visualize a drawing pin. This is what in Fred's own words, he describes how it came about. In October 42, as a result of my dissatisfaction at the lack of war work being performed by the company employing me, I decided to start on my own on a spare time basis. I worked every night until 9 p.m. and the work had to be done in my own time after my official working day had finished. I called my little company L&F Bruell. I borrowed a power press. I believe he put it in the basement of his house. My total capital and cash resources were £52, 12 shillings, and my first press tool cost me £65. I had to borrow the balance from an engineer in Auckland whom I had known and had worked with for some years, and who was kind enough to extend this credit to me. The cardboard company gave me a credit of 60,000 boxes, which were to be used to box the 6 million drawing pins which I made at that time. The manufacture and quality of those drawing pins was a saga of endless difficulties. However, with my typical stubborn determination, I manufactured these drawing pins, although I made a loss of about £100. The second 6 million drawing pins were much better, both quality and profit-wise. It encouraged me to make pen holders, mathematical sets, and other stationery hardware, particularly related to school needs, which helped Rex Manufacturing Company, as it was now called, to become established. Thus was the scrap from a can making used, saving the country from having to import these items at a time when foreign currency was scarce. The Bruell children, Ronnie, Lorraine, and Peter, all worked in Rex Manufacturing, under Rex for the company.
Book 3, we called Bearing Witness. I had a collection of transcripts, stories, descriptions, and altogether documenting what happened to family members during the war years. So some of them were transcripts from camp survivors. 3 of them were from people who were on kinder transports. There were several Shoah Foundation interviews, that's Spielberg's organisation, and more. And I thought that I would like to collect all of these testimonies in a single book to show that what happened to an extended family during the war years 39 to 45.
I was left to work out how best to assemble all this data. The sombre subject matter needed to be reflected, I felt, from the start. And so I started with this page of photographs of family murdered at Auschwitz. Then followed that with 5 pages listing all the family members who did not survive the war. Additionally, photos from concentration camps, which I took when I was visiting, punctuated each chapter, and the book ended with 7 pages of those awful transport cards, of which you've seen 2, each one carefully recording the final movement of a family member. Moving, again, the list of names proved problematic in moving data between programs we weren't used to and onto the page. These came as an Excel file, and I managed to transfer them into my page making file, but every time there was an error located or noticed, it was back and forth.
And one little touch that Mike added, which wasn't discussed but appeared, are the Hebrew letters to the top right of each page, and they are the letters of the inscription that go on a Jewish person's headstone. We might say, "Here lies." I thought it was lovely that Mike put them at the top of each page.
This graphic shows the huge percentage of European Jews who perished under the Nazi regime. The lighter coloured column indicates the number of Jews living in each country prior to the war, while the darker column shows the number who perished. Similar graphic sits over there, but with a slightly different emphasis.
So I'm going to tell 2 stories of 2 of the people who are collected there and gave Shoah Foundation interviews. The 2 people are Ilse and Margit, 2 cousins from Brno, cousins of my father's. They were both only children, and their mothers were sisters who had married 2 brothers. So they were always said they were doubly related, and they managed to stay together throughout the war. So I'll start with Ilse. I had a little more about Ilse because I'd interviewed her myself when she was in Auckland in 2015. Both women almost reached 100. They were both amazing. Ilse went to the States after the war and had a family there, and Margit stayed in Brno, and so I have cousins there as well. The family received their deportation notices, told to assemble on a certain date. I think it was December 42. They were to be deported to Theresienstadt, which was the concentration camp in Czechoslovakia. It was thought that they might be better off if they were married, so they were hastily married off to young men that I think they knew vaguely, but were certainly not very familiar with. And that was the day before they were deported. So I said to Ilse, well, how was that? Oh, she said, it was a disaster. And I said, well, did you get a honeymoon? She said, they gave us a room on our own for a night. We were both virgins. We didn't have a clue what we were doing. And she said it was an absolute disaster. So she was arrived in Theresienstadt, and her job was to look after mothers and children. And she quite enjoyed that. She had actually been about to go to England to study, and she had hoped to study medicine. So what she was doing in Theresienstadt, she says she enjoyed. I assume that she did. And she said after the babies grew up, she was then just helping in the medical facility there, which of course she also enjoyed. They were there for almost 2 years. Margit job in Theresienstadt was to look after the rabbits. And to get food for the rabbits, she had to go outside of the ghetto. And I think that gave her a little freedom. So one thing that must have upset them was that Margaret's father was shot in the ghetto, and I'm not sure of the circumstances, but I do know that he was shot. Then they were, in October 1944, they were transported to Auschwitz, and and of course, it was a different situation there. Fortunately, they were only there for a short few months, and they were then sent back across to a place near the Czech border in near Gross-Rosen. It was an armory within the camp of Gross-Rosen, and it was near the Czech border. There they were liberated in 1945. So at the end of the war, there were some survivors in the family from Theresienstadt. My grandmother survived, and one of the cousins came from New York and took everybody except Margaret to the States. So he gave jobs and set them up. But Margaret fell in love with a non-Jewish guy named Karol Nowak, and stayed in Prague and lived there under the communists. And of course, they'd missed out on their education, both of them, because they'd been in the camps at the time when they might have completed their school and had some tertiary education. So Ilse used to come to Czechoslovakia and meet up with Margaret after the war every year, every summer. They'd spend 2 or 3 weeks together, and they were like a pair of giggling school children when they met. That's what I remember of them. Margaret didn't speak English, so she spoke German, but she didn't like speaking German. She was also hard of hearing, but we did get to know her quite well because we were in Prague several times, and she always looked after us. And she's got this smug look on her face, and she's holding up a watch. She and Ilse were interviewed on Prague television, and she's holding up the watch, which she said she kept with her through the whole period in the camps, hidden in her private parts. So, yes, how amazing is that? I've never been able to ask many questions, but I did send an email the other day to her granddaughter, Shaka, who's my Czech translator. I said, Shaka, what happened to the watch? Is that the original watch strap? Or she said, oh, I don't know where it is now. I have to ask Dad. So anyway, that's so Ilse, this is an amazing story. So Ilse one time was in New York, and she was in the area of the antique bookshops. She's walking down, and she looked in the window of a bookshop, and she sees this photograph. And she realises that she is in the photograph walking into Auschwitz. So there she is with the red arrow above her head, holding onto her blanket and walking I can't imagine how she felt. And Margaret is 2 steps behind, but hardly recognisable. So Margaret says, since we were young women, it meant we had our periods, And in the place where they were issuing us clothes, there was a stack of cloth sanitary towels. At that time, cloth pads were used. Today, we're made of cotton wool. And these cloth pads were just placed there at our disposal for those who had their periods. But we were smart enough and we thought, it's October now, it's cold, and we've got nothing to cover our heads. So we put this stuff on our heads. At least that's what I did. And that's the white thing on our heads as we walked into the camp. And the book that photograph came from is called the Auschwitz Album. And how amazing is that? But they were both, there's Margaret on the left with Shaka, her granddaughter, and Miriam, her great-granddaughter. The last year or so of her life, she had to go into care, and she was very unhappy about that. There's one of Mike's photos that crept in, which looks entirely appropriate. Yes, I think that's that. Oh, Miloš Dobry. So Miloš Dobry came from Olomouc, which is where my dad's family came from. And he made contact with me in the 1990s. And I think we first visited in 1995 with the kids. And he told me that he'd been on the transport with my uncle, Freddie. Now, Freddie had maintained that, yes, what was happening in Germany and Austria was bad, was awful, but he couldn't imagine that if the Germans came to Czechoslovakia, that anything really terrible would happen. So he stayed. And the result of that was that he went to Theresienstadt and then east to Auschwitz. And we don't have any record of what happened, but our imaginations. But Miloš spoke good English. He'd been president of the Czech rugby team, which had taken him to English-speaking countries, and he spoke quite good English, and he always kept in touch with us and always entertained us, made us pancakes with his special job of strawberry jam whenever we arrived in Olomouc, and generally made us feel at home. But I found a Shoah Foundation interview in English that he had done, and he talked about how a man by the name of Briess had saved his fiance's family from a transport east. And I'm sure that that was my uncle, because the name Briess is also Briess. And I just thought it's a fairly recent occurrence that I found this interview. And I thought, how amazing is that, 70 years after the war? Of course, I never knew him, but that was the last story. Oh, this is Bart Arolsen. In 2007, I went with a group of 7 Israelis to the archive at Bart Arolsen. In fact, it was just a document centre then. All the information and documents that had been taken from the Germans at the end of the war is stored there. It is run by the International Committee of the Red Cross, and for many years it was closed. People wanted, for instance, confirmation of death or whatever, and they wouldn't have a look in the archive to see if there was any record. And then they changed their tune and researchers could go there, and we were asked to, they had a central names index of people that they had records for. I looked at the list, I saw my family's names, the first 6 names on my list, that they had information, and so they asked us to send ahead of time a list of the people that we wanted to research, and I sent a long list, and when I arrived there was a dedicated computer for me and over 100 manila folders of one for each of the people that I was hoping to research. So I sat there for 4 days with a clerical person at my disposal. We were all of us got the same treatment, and they were simply wonderful. And when we went home, they scanned every single document on every file and sent it to us. So after leaving there, I thought, what has this experience meant to me? What, how do I see it? And many of the files had these transport cards on them, giving details first of the first transport and then of the second, firstly to Theresienstadt, secondly to Auschwitz or Sobibor or Treblinka. And Mike and I talked about it, and he found a way to incorporate them. I saw them as tombstones standing up on end. And so Mike found a way to put 7 pages.
7 pages.
Of these transport cards in there.
The last book, book 4, was a little lighter. It gathered together articles and research that Claire and other members of the family had done over time. When looking for a way of connecting the variety of topics covered, I also discovered 2 other family hobbies: Anton's dreidel collection and Claire's collection of old postcards. The dreidels, the spinning tops used in games at Hanukkah, the cards are fine, but I was keen to have them photographed with a strong shadow which would stand out on the page. So what we ended up with something like that. So as a separator between the stories, and these dreidels were unusual and interesting and cast lovely images.
And the postcards.
And the postcards were no problem at all, just needed scanning. Yeah.
So, couple of stories from book 4. This guy up here, Maurice Benedict, was known as the owner of the main Viennese newspaper read by most of the Jewish community, called the Neue Freie Press. And Peter's mother had told me that there was a connection to him, and she'd shown me the name in a book, but it didn't kind of sink in until the obituaries from the Neue Freie Press suddenly came online and they were indexed. And I thought, oh, well, I know the date of death for Maurice Benedict. He was Peter's great uncle. Maybe I'll look for an obituary. And sure enough, I found an obituary in very over-the-top sort of language, praising him to the skies, or we would consider it over-the-top language today. And I sort of wondered, who was this man who ended his life editing, owning and publishing the major Viennese newspaper of his time, known by everyone? And what was it about this newspaper that the words subscriber to the Neue Freie Press on a business card validated the owner as a man of the world, informed on current events? So you've got the photo of him up there. He was born in 1849 and arrived in Vienna as a journalist, a young sub-editor, in 1872. And he's shown as a journalist on his marriage record to Adele in 1874. So the paper went from strength to strength, and it was known for its innovations. Theodor Herzl covered the Dreyfus trial though Benedict was no Zionist, but he employed other well-known journalists and writers of his time. Famous writers besides Herzl were employed, including Arthur Schnitzler, Hugo von Hofmannsthal, Richard Beer Hoffmann, Stefan Zweig. Whereas the predecessor newspaper, which was called Die Presse, the press, only published translations of English and French literature, the Neue Freie Press had some separate sections on art, literature, agriculture, natural history, and so on, and they were called feuilleton, which is the French feuille for leaf. And these sections, this format was very popular with readers, and Stefan Zweig says in his World of Yesteryear, he noted that the feuilleton differed from the political articles and became the leading arbiter of literary culture in the Vienna of the turn of the century. So one of his greatest achievements came in 1892, executing a masterpiece. He was clearly a man with a sense of purpose and focus. In the process of diplomatic discussions between Berlin and Vienna, the German Chancellor Otto von Bismarck rushed to Vienna. Benedict secured an interview with Bismarck, seized his top hat and gloves, and raced with his briefcase to the hotel. Although aware that one incorrect word could result in a European incident, he went without pencil or paper, recalled the entire interview from memory, and published the interview the next day. And apparently Bismarck reacted by sending a visiting card from Berlin to Vienna, which said, "Bene dixit," well said. And what I remember from my sixth form history class is my history teacher saying, if you encounter Bismarck in a history exam, avoid him with a 10-foot barge pole. I don't know why that stuck in my head, but anyway, so in 1904 was the 40th anniversary of Die Neue Freie Press, and it was written up, to my delight, in fulsome praise in another newspaper called the Österreichs Illustrierte Zeitung, the Austrian illustrated newspaper. And there was a 2-page spread with photographs of Benedict, his co-editor Edward Bacher, and other staff. So Bacher died in 1904, which meant that Benedict was in a position to buy the paper and control its contents completely. So we have, there's a header of the newspaper there. Underneath on the left is a photograph of the printing room and the rather imposing building of the newspaper, and it gives a scale by putting those little people in the foreground and the horse and carriage. In Benedict's support of liberalism and German interests, some considered that the paper and its editors contributed to the causes of the First World War. Benedict survived the war, but he must have been dismayed to see what happened to his beloved Austro-Hungarian Empire that he loved so much. He was forced to accept the reality of change when new nations emerged from the crumbling structure of the old empire. His style was seen as being excessively moralistic and belonging to an earlier time. But nevertheless, to the end, he devoted every waking hour to his beloved newspaper. He held a position of great influence and was even appointed to the Herrenhaus, the upper house of the Austrian Parliament, in 1917. After his death in 1920, the paper was taken over by his son Ernst, who had big shoes to fill. Following the rise of Nazism in Austria, The paper suffered declining readership, although Ernst worked hard to ensure its continuity. In the 1920s, he appointed David Ben-Gurion as correspondent for the NFP in Palestine, and of course, David Ben-Gurion went on to become Israel's first prime minister. Visiting the US in 1932, Ernst Benedict was received by Governor Franklin D. Roosevelt and also by President Hoover, and in his speech he paid tribute to the legacy of his father Moritz for his credo of liberalism and the high standard of literary excellence which he achieved. In 1932, Ernst was forced to sell his shares in the paper to the Austrian government, and he and his family fled the country, abandoning everything they owned. So I guess what I want to say about Maurice Benedict and the NFP is that I took a germ of information and I researched around it, and in the end I built a story. And once I started researching, I found a lot more material than I expected. And there are family trees and all sorts of other things that we don't have time to look at. So the last little story will be a good one to end up. This is a story that I actually wrote for a magazine called Avatenu, which is no longer in operation, but they published it. We had some prospective names for it. I think we called it Abandoned Treasures or Connecting Families Across the World. Sometime in 2018, I received an email out of the blue. It came from a young woman in the Czech Republic who introduced herself as Emma. She asked if I was a relative of Ernst Vogel. Well, yes, I replied. He was married to Jenny, the daughter of my great-aunt Hermine Levy from Ohersky Brod. Hermine and her husband Rudolf Subak had lived in Brno, Moravia at Smetanova 30. Jenny and Ernst Vogel had lived in Vienna but must have moved back to her parents' address in Brno after the Anschluss, the invasion of Austria by the Germans. From Brno, Jenny, husband Ernst, mother Hermine, and Jenny's sisters Mariana and Gertrude were all deported to Terezin in 1942. None survived. My young correspondent, Emma, was looking for relatives of Ernst and Jenny Vogel, married in Brno in 1918, and she wanted to know more about the family. Her story was this. Emma's mother, Lena, had grown up living in Smetanova, Brno, with her parents. Next door to their home in the 1930s, a family by the name of Subak Vogel had lived. Lena and then later Emma had always been curious about some things that had pride of place in their family living room. These were two pictures in the shape of plates showing modelled and hand-painted domestic scenes from the 19th century, and three other items: a clock, a magazine rack, and a beautiful blue vase. Well, the glass vase was on the previous slide, and the very 1930s magazine rack and clock. Emma's grandpa told Lena and then Emma about the origin of these treasures. In fact, they weren't so much valuable for their monetary value, but because they told a story about a family, one of so many, about people who didn't come back. Grandpa had been a small boy when his parents' friend from next door, Ernst Vogel, hid the items with his neighbour for safekeeping. Emma's grandpa's father. The Vogels left Brno in 1942 and were never heard from again. About the plates, Emma wrote, "It was hung up in Grandpa's living room, above sofa. I used to lay on the sofa and watch those pictures. It reminded me like dolls. It acted mystic to me. I didn't know the story behind them, or maybe I knew but didn't understand yet." Lena and Emma together resolved to find out more about the family, as they felt a responsibility to find out the fate of the people who had owned these precious items. Precious, not so much in value as I said, but in the story they told about a family that never returned to their homes after being deported. Grandpa's young boy memory remembered only a married couple and 2 older children living at Smetanova 30, next door. Lena came up with the idea of having Stolpersteine, or stumble stones, laid in front of the house to memorialise Ernst and Jenny Vogel, and they wanted to find out more about the lives of the Vogel-Subak family. Their search led them to archives and repositories in Vienna, Prague and Brno, and to Yad Vashem, where they found the pages of testimony I had filed for the family on the 15th of June, 1999. So Emma contacted me, and after an email exchange, she wrote later, "I'm so happy that I find somebody to ask about Vogel's family. They are no longer here, but they are still alive in our family, in story, in those things. We would appreciate if you can tell us more about the Vogel's family destiny. We can finish the Stolperstein." Further saying, "Thank you so much for your email. I'm so cheerful from our online appointment because it means that no one cannot disappear until anybody else remember him. And that is such a marvellous feeling. Of course, I will take picture of all mentioned things." And shortly after this, she sent me lovely high-resolution photographs of all the pieces. Shortly after this, she sent me the photographs. She told me that she herself had married the grandson of one of the few survivors from Mykolaiv, a once thriving centre of Jewish life in South Moravia. Some 18 months later, she reported, "Last few weeks were very emotional here in Czech Republic. Finally, June 14th at 10:30 a.m., we put the Stolperstein for Jenny and Ernst Vogel in front of Street Smetanova 30. It was big satisfaction for my mum and all of us. My mum and I finished the history debt, and the feeling about that is amazing. Also, my second child, a boy, was born a week later. This Saturday, we are having big summer celebration of the 3rd birthday of my daughter and also of the happiness and joy. And of course, it is also celebrating of happy ending and opening." And she sent me these photographs, which are on the slides, together with, we can see her daughter is there with, and she's there looking very pregnant, and that's her mum is holding the daughter, and the Stolperstein are on the bottom left, and they are appearing in many different countries all over Europe now, memorialising people who were killed in the Holocaust, murdered. So sometime later, I arrived home and there was a heavy parcel on the front steps. taking it inside, carefully unwrapping, I found the blue vase. It must have cost her a small fortune to send it to me. It was very heavy. So she finished her last email saying, "Can you believe how history can connect people from so far? I am very happy that we met at least by mail and post." And finally, she wrote to me, and she knew that both Peter's grandfather and mine were buried in the Jewish cemetery in Brno, it's quite a big cemetery. Brno is the main city in Moravia, and I believe there's 12,000 Jewish burials there. And she wrote to me and she said, "I went to Brno, which would have been three-quarter of an hour drive, and she said, I looked up where your grandfathers are buried and I placed a stone on each grave for you." And that is a Jewish thing that we do when we visit gravestones. We put a stone on the grave. So I just thought that was such a lovely thing for her to do and an appropriate end to the talk. Now, we have a couple of things to say. Firstly, if you would like to speak, can you signal to Carol, who's got the loudspeaker, the microphone, so that people on Zoom can hear. Also, that this book is not being published, but it is in the Turnbull and there will be copies here. But if you are curious to have a look, you can go to that webpage.
It's gone.
Has it gone?
Oh, no, it's there. Yeah.
familyhistory.bruell.co.nz, and my oldest son fixed that up for us so that you can go in and download copies of the books and have a look at them if you like. But it's been a wonderful way to send the books to people overseas and researchers that ask me for them.
Thank you.
Was there anything else? No. Okay. Thank you. Questions?
Yeah, I'll start.
Oh, you got
If
something?
From someone in the chat.
So if any of you have questions or would like to speak, Carol's standing there with me.
Yes. So, book one, Briess, literally destroyed in 1972. Random vandalism or planned urban development?
Do you know?
I think it was destroyed, and some of those headstones were moved. And fortunately for us, my great-grandparents' headstones were some of the ones that were moved. It was a cemetery where there were also Turkish soldiers buried from World War I, which was a bit interesting, I thought. I don't think it was vandalism. Not the whole, or the communists might have destroyed it, who knows?
He's also asking, I'm curious to know if a particular formatting or publishing program was used.
I use InDesign. It's a product from Adobe. It's not an easy program to get to know, and I'm near the end of using it, really, because we have to pay a monthly subscription. But I've been laying out newspapers and magazines now for 20 years, so I'm quite used to it.
Joanna was asking, can you, what was the most interest to the younger generation in NZ?
Oh,
Grandchildren, maybe.
yeah, I'm thinking what stories. Well, I don't talk a lot about stories around the camps to my grandchildren. although they're aware of the war and so on, and 3 of them are at Jewish schools where they're learning Jewish history. I think they like that story, the last one I read. My 14-year-old granddaughter was delighted with the Morris Benedict story and the connection to Theodore Herzl because she knew about Theodore Herzl. So I think, and then my 10-year-old grandson was very cross because he couldn't come to my evening talk. It was a school night. And I said, I can tell you some of the stories. So, we sat in the study and I just picked out a couple of things I thought would interest him. And he sat there hanging on every word. So, yeah.
We have another question from Ruth Gilbert. Why did you decide not to actually publish the books?
Too hard. They weigh, you won't be aware, but they weigh 3 kilos. And I just thought, I can hardly lift them. And I thought, what price would I put on them? And how many would I print? And who would actually want to buy the collection of 4 books, particularly if you can get them online and, dip into them that way. And I thought if anyone can use the collection, that's great. But I guess I did do it for the family so that the whole thing was the story of one family's experience, of the war and the effects of the war ongoing. Yeah.
I have a question.
Just a minute.
And I need a mic. Available, or could you tell us your list of resources? You mentioned archives, Yad Vashem, software programs. Is there a list?
Yes, there is a list.
There is a list.
Yes, there is a list.
Somewhere.
And we decided that we would try and publish that online as well, didn't we?
We did.
Yes. I think we can talk Claire's son Ezra into putting it in together with that website.
Thank you.
Yeah.
It might be there.
Yeah.
I've got one on my computer, actually.
Well, thank you.
Actually, I can, if you want, I can share it to all the people who participate.
Yeah,
Yeah.
okay.
Send me an email.
I will.
So to send
Yeah,
to everyone.
sure.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much for coming. No, one more.
I'm flabbergasted. I don't really have a question. I'm not going to give a lot of speech either. I just want to say thank you so much. It's an incredible piece of research and an incredible process of putting this all together. It really is, it shows a talent, shows an interest, it tells a very, very important story and stories. And I'm not sure what else I can say. It would be great if Ezra would help the rest of us with this. That would be really good. But, this is a really, really special piece of work. And I just want to thank you, Claire and Mike, both of you, and Peter and all of you for telling us the story, some of which, resonates with some of us. The few of us, I'm just counting, there's 2 of us, I think, 3, who are also from Moravia, Bohemia, Czech Republic, and so on. 4 and counting. Yeah. So thank you very much. I think it's been amazing.
Thank you, Helen. It's interesting that we're all doing things around our family stories and we're all doing them in different ways. I mean, I could never have done this without Mike, undoubtedly. It would have been a different kind of book, but it was so much and I couldn't put it in order. And Mike did that right at the beginning, probably without realising.
Not just right at the beginning, but when
Claire, they're asking here, would publishing have raised issues of copyright for historic images, scans, etc.?
It might have, but I would have checked before putting anything in that was, you know.
we were quite careful about what we put in. I'd be surprised if there was any images that were unable to use. Most of them were private photographs.
And pretty old too. I mean, the documents. I mean, publishing might have, but I guess I didn't want to spend the time writing a glossary, writing explanations of things, because that wasn't what was important to me. But on the way I organise my information is that I have this program called Reunion, which I've been using since 1995. And it's a system of relational databases. So I have a card for each person, and you can hit Claire Bruell, and then you can hit my mother, my father, my children, and it goes through to their card and so on. So whenever I get information on a person, I go into their card and I put the information in, either copy and paste, and or just type it in. And what I learnt not early enough was that I needed to make a list of my sources, where I got information from, because there's still information that I got right at the beginning, and I don't know where I got it from, and that was would have been a little bit difficult too. So, yeah.
Question over here.
I have a question. Congratulations, Claire, Mike, Peter, and all those others that had anything to do with this amazing compilation. Will you be able to track the number of people who access that website? And B, where do you think it will be? Who's going to be using it in the future? What do you see as a forward plan?
It can be tracked, Ernie, but only my son Ezra has access. So I have to pester him, and he sends me a list of. He doesn't have names. He has the email addresses of people who've gone into the site and downloaded them. I think I've only asked him twice, and there haven't been many people, but yeah, a few people have followed up. And now, where do I see it used? Well, because it's so accessible now, I mean, it came about because I'd done all this work, and a couple of researchers in Austria contacted me and wanted access to the book, or wanted to know where to buy the book. And I just thought, well, the family overseas also will want it. And so I emailed Ezra, who's in Melbourne, and I said, is there a way that we can make this available to people overseas? And he went away and did a bit of research and came back and said, well, I think this website called Fingertip, I think it was called, and he said we can get it and use it for nothing, and attach it to our email. And yeah, so that's how it happened. But I mean, out of the blue, people contact you. So, Ernie, you ask, how's it going to be used? So I had an email from a guy in Vienna who is the or a curator of carriages at the Kunsthistorisches Museum in Vienna. And he said, I've been living for a few years in this building at 21 Zirkusgasse, which is the home where Peter's mother grew up. And he said, I had a feeling that there must have been Jewish owners previously, before the war. And so I'm researching all the people who are owners or tenants of the building. And he said, I'd like you to tell me what you know about the building and so on. So, you know, I sent him straight to that. In the meantime, he'd Googled me and found out a whole lot of stuff about me. But I sent him, you know, the interview that Lily had given me about growing up. And I also had the 3 Shoah Foundation interviews with her siblings who escaped to the States. And I sort of did a summary of those 3 siblings who all saw their journey to the States in slightly different ways. And I put them together and I just called it, in one of the books, God Bless America. Because, of course, they found refuge in America. They describe their feelings, what we know when they saw the Statue of Liberty and you know, America could do no wrong. So I called it God Bless America. But here this researcher out of the blue from Vienna wants information. So, you know, Ernie, I think it's very hard to assess.
I would also say that in the Holocaust education that we do here, that these books could be very useful in front of a class full of kids, because it gives the whole range from pre-war to post-war and everything that went on in between, and it covers a whole family. So I think that if you've got kids in front of you and you're talking, and what I've managed to do is that we've taken chapters from the book and they can be used separately and passed around with questions, and these were proofs. So they can still be used in small groups to give kids a short piece to read and some suitable questions to go with it. I think that'd be great. Anything else?
Claire, will you give the books to your children? Grandchildren?
Yep.
Can you repeat the question, because she didn't have the mic?
Okay. Have I given them to my children and grandchildren? Actually, the children were sort of part of the ongoing, because they actually did get quite excited, but they knew a lot of the stories because as I found them and told them, they would be involved. So one son is in Melbourne and one son is here, and the kids are all of an age between 6 and 14, and the 14-year-old has been doing a roots project in Melbourne at Mount Scopus, and she's been right on my tail about people and dates, and she got right into it. So, yeah.
I just wanted to follow up from Mike's suggestion. Mike, have you actually communicated that to the Holocaust Centre? You have?
Yep.
And they've responded well?
Yeah.
Just this morning.
Very good suggestion. Thank you.
And you left.
I'm wondering, can you claim any for going back, stolen off the boat?
Oh, yes, that's covered in the books too. Some of it, yes, some of it, no. Yeah.
Anything else? Thank you very much.